suggestions for longer term issues, as this one is the most complicated at some level. We're thinking about coastal resiliency and infrastructure. I have to think we might end up with more priorities in longer range than shorter range. The other ones, in case you must be aware, or I hope you are, the other ones were tourism and transportation, which one would think would be parking structures or trolleys or water taxis, relatively quicker turnaround on potential suggestions and implementation. So this may be a little more complicated in terms of where we go on the suggestions, but I'm hoping we're also going to be circulating the comments from Danielle Cheeseborough from Town of Stonington, the select woman. I don't know, if John Burt put together anything as well, we'll ask him in terms of infrastructure, resiliency, et cetera. John, if I know I'm putting you on the spot, would you have any comments you want to make, as I've gotten people about your concerns on developmental resiliency, infrastructure, sewers, et cetera?
Sure, and Danielle and I met to go over what our priorities are for the downtown with resilience. We completed it was focused on the Groton side, but we completed a downtown Mystic resiliency and sustainability plan recently. However, we did have large input from people across the river in Stonington. And Danielle and I went through the findings of that, and most of the findings applied to both sides of the river. And I don't know if people have had a chance to read that. There's a lot of simple things that just cost money, like install backflow preventers on stormwater outfalls. We need to raise some of the roads. Where some of the roads are, it used to be originally water. So water, is a real issue there. We need to raise some places up. We have a whole string of things that we think apply to both sides of the river, and then a few things that apply separately. She's of course got the issue with the seaport, that they're trying to move back away from the water. There's flooding issues there. So some things are unique, but a lot of the things overlap.
Okay, but those are related to the 5 points that she sent us?
Yeah, she sent kind of a brief, all she said in resilience was basically look at what I put together. So
okay. No, I just wanted to make sure I represented, then it's from both of you per se, on the resiliency side, okay? So we will be circulating. You may not have seen that yet. I've asked Patricia, and I think we agreed we'd send it out after the meeting today. But John, why don't I drag you out a little bit further in terms of, you and Danielle are going to be, I think, instrumental here and fundamental to the conversation about what we want to do on the infrastructure side, or what the needs are that you think for this coastal community, which I'd let you, since Danielle isn't there, I'll take you for both sides of that board, not that friendly border between Stonington and Groton.
Yeah. And her and I work closely together on parking, on resilience, all of it. Like I said, she said, she agrees with my list. The only thing she had different was the seaport.
Okay, but on those issues, like you ran through quickly. The areas of concern are increased flooding from storms.
Yeah, and that's kind of complicated a little bit further on our side. There's a lot of elevation that goes up on our side. We need to also kind of in conjunction find a way to slow up the water going down, like rain gardens, that type of thing. So it's kind of a two-pronged effort on our side, but we actually have a CIP, a capital project this year to review costs of the backflow preventers. So hopefully we'll have some costs on that after not too long.
Now the backflow preventers, for me, I mean, is it the unwashed? We're talking about backflow preventers basically on storm drains.
Yeah, and it's water from the rivers coming right in during storms. Yeah.
Right.
And making it worse along there, but we also have water coming downhill at the same time. We have several roads that are routinely flooding very badly that you can't get through. Even on a light rain, we have River Road that it doesn't take much rain to close down a couple sections of River Road. We're also looking at a little pilot to raise a portion of River Road coming up to, we've applied for some grant dollars if we get it, to do a pilot, kind of test some things on River Road and how to raise the roads there. You know, we have issues like we have, pump station that needs to be raised up. A lot of things that we know we need to do, they just take money to do. We'd like to also do some things just generally like stockpile materials like sump pumps, generators, that type of stuff that could be used when things happen. Some overall climate resilience type things like more tree cover, downtown, pop-up cooling measures for when it's really hot. We've had a lot of complaints about that. That's kind of, there's some things that we just would like to do, like partner with Circa for a heat study. Some things might be just having, if the committee wanted to sign off, yeah, we think that's a good idea, just so we could, more support for getting, for doing things and getting things done. But, what you send out, what you should have will detail. If you look at the email I sent you, Representative Meskers, I pointed out what are the shared things between the two sides and what's Groton specific.
Okay, perfect. And I'll refer that both to Deep and OPM if you guys take a look. So I appreciate your participation today. One of the other issues I wanted to bring up while we're having the conversation, even though it refers more to transportation, is there were conversations about potential for water taxing, and there was a conversation about potential dredging of the Mystic River. And I'd like to refer to Deep on that. I know that last year in Commerce, we did create a small harbor fund. I think it was in the anticipation that it could be the recipient of either federal or state dollars. I'd love to have a conversation with Deep about the potential and what it would take to consider that and where we would go with that, right? Because if the dredging is part of making the viability of that water taxi, I'd like to know, how we think about that.
Sure. Yeah. Preliminary thoughts. Dredging is complicated, permitting wise.
Mm-hmm.
So it really would come down to some of the specifics, like the volume and where the material will go. But it is something that is feasible if those types of considerations are planned for ahead of time, which is something that we can help with when it becomes, if this is something that wants to move forward, we can provide some of that guidance on what would need to be taken into account to make it viable.
I don't know if you've been approached before, and I guess if you've heard any inquiries or questions about the Mystic area for dredging, Mystic River, I'd love to get some general guidance on ballpark estimates. I understand this is not going to be put in a commitment, but ballpark estimates. What do we think? In generally to do the type of job that potentially you think would be necessary, sufficient or bare minimum. What kind of price range would bare minimum for a better job in terms of just guesstimates on cubic yards, cost of movement, blah blah blah. Just to begin to put some generic dollar figure on what we'd be looking at, which would be, I'm not even sure we're going down that road, but the generic figures on what it would be, we'd be looking for federal funding or state funding to try to, habilitate the type of water taxis or use of the waterways. So, I mean, the commissioning of a study and all is going to be a further step if we decide, that kind of stuff should be happening in December through, in our hearings, and so into next year. But if we kind of are looking at dollar figures, it kind of it'll be helpful. Just very generic, very easy. For OPM and some of the earlier meetings, there were conversations about taxing districts, mentioning Bridgeport, et cetera. If OPM has any information on what some of those special legislative taxing districts look like, it would be helpful that I could get them to our group.
So you're looking for information pertaining to how they were enacted or what type of tax they collect?
A combination.
Okay.
I'm looking here's the scoping. It would be helpful. I'm trying to figure out what the taxing districts look like, why they were created, and what oversight. I mean, as I'm sitting on Commerce, if we ever go down this road, if we have get legislative buy-in and implement, I want to make sure that the specific utilization doesn't become supplementary, or it doesn't substitute generic taxation in the local area, but becomes targeted for economic development because money's fungible. So if I'm going to do a taxing district in the greater Mystic area, if the representatives agree to it and we decide to go down that road, if it becomes, a supplemental of some type that is going to go for whether it's infrastructure, or if it's going to go for funding the dredging or for water taxis or trolleys or transportation to improve the experience, or for one or two local concerns for the residents where there's a benefit directly to the residents and not just to the visitors. But I want to figure out what the scope of those limitations look like so far and how we want to do it, because for me, it would be for economic development if we ever would agree. I'm not suggesting we're going there, but it's one of the ideas that was raised, Commissioner Boughton was of the mind as well. He was going to check to see what structural organizations existed away from us in other states, i.e. Cape May District, some of the other tourism districts, that not to raise taxes, but from the point of view of attracting federal dollars for certain development programs. I wouldn't expect you guys, but if you have any knowledge of, the Cape May or any of the different tourism districts that have been able to formulate a entity that it could be the recipient of what would be the equivalent of county dollars for tourism or for funding for special projects.
No,
I don't know that. Right?
I know Commissioner Boughton has been big on trying to form that type of organization to leverage federal dollars. So we can certainly circle back and catch up on that.
Yeah, and I know he's working on that indirectly or directly. So if you had the conversation, I'm agnostic as to who helps us on that one, but it's more figuring out, is there a venue to attract dollars to our efforts, and how do we do it?
No, that makes sense.
It'd be interesting from you and Deep to talk about what plans exist currently in relation to climate resiliency and infrastructure. Are there dollars we are sequestering through Deep or through OPM for long-term projects for coastal resiliency that we could be potentially targeted to solve some of the problems locally? Because then I would look to partner on those through Commissioner Boughton to leverage those with potential federal funds if there are match requirements. Is it something we could power through one or two projects that we're already thinking of engaging with for coastal resiliency and improvements, that we could partner federal dollars? That would be helpful to know. What else are we? Kate, do you have any thoughts here or comments?
My thoughts on infrastructure were that potentially a low-hanging fruit would be looking and seeing if the zoning code needed to be addressed within Mystic or within Stonington or Groton to make it more resilient against the flooding that we anticipate. And then also I too identified the MS4 improvements, and then there are some funding opportunities around MS4 with federal grants for drainage projects that could be leveraged. And I also noted that there are impaired water bodies, and this is an anadromous fish passage up the Mystic River, so there's also funding for those things. The other thing that I was not quite certain is whether public bathrooms and sanitation were something that the towns wanted to tackle. I know that we have one public bathroom on the Stonington side. And then I just wanted to note that the FHWA has provided this tool called the VAST tool, and that helps you to prioritize which improvements need to move forward first with respect to hazard mitigation. And I thought that maybe doing some sort of exercise with VAST might be a good implementation strategy.
I think you might have taken me over my skis there, Kate.
Sorry.
That's okay. We may need to have a side conversation to educate me on some of the programs and what your thoughts are there, so I can
Okay.
be the champion of attempting to coordinate some of the implementation.
Potentially, it might work the best if we come up with specific projects, and then I can try and help find funding.
Okay. So that I would recommend that when you have a chance, probably a direct on conversation with John and with Danielle on the infrastructure that they're thinking, and then we work on the coordination with the group. So just because it's the nitty gritty on the ground there that probably I'm not necessarily going to be able to add to in the short term, other than advocacy. Once there's kind of a thought process on that coastal resiliency. Is there any other comments people want to have on this right now, on where we're hoping to go on this? So I think I've asked Deep to, NOPM, the generic questions. You're working with Mark on the potential information on taxing authority, information on grants for forming a group to do this. Andrea, I'll get you in a second. On Deep, on potential dredging, scopes of projects, dollar pricing, targeting, minimum maximums you've seen so far on this, assuming that the fill is not bad fill, I guess that's the worst case. But assuming that it's not bad fill, and we just have to figure out where, what the permitting and where the locations are. I know that's been the problem in the past, right? And the turnaround time on permitting, because I had heard we had some backlogs. I don't know if we're moving forward on that problem yet.
Yeah, the short version is yes, that is part of our 20 by 26 is to address our legacy permits and our permitting timeframes. But you are correct that depending on the level of contamination or not of the material to be dredged, that can really affect the cost and permitting time.
Yeah, and for me, that's just as a banker, it's going to be minimum, maximum dollars and time. I mean, and it's fine. I'm not holding you. It's just like we want to try to circle around the drain of like what budgetary issues look like. Representative Baumgartner, take it away.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Let me circle back. A few things were mentioned in the last 20 minutes, jumping around a lot of different areas. We'll start with just some of the revenue generating ideas that have come to surface. I know there was a report that went around conducted by the first selectman of Stonington. Danielle, definitely implore everybody on this call to take a look at that regarding the use of sales tax, but particularly for municipalities. I've had some conversations with both first selectman Cheeseborough and town manager Burt regarding revenue that is generated largely by the tourism sector within this area, and really taking a long-term look at identifying or utilizing those revenues for the purposes of paying for services that are associated with accommodating tourism. So obviously, with tourism, you have an increased need for policing, especially during the festival season. You need, increase in, a plethora of other services relating to public works and trash collection. One area, in addition to the sales tax, that I think ought to be looked at would be the lodging tax. And so my question to you, Mr. Chair, is would this be the appropriate subcommittee to have conversation regarding revenue? Because I wasn't certain if where that conversation should be taking place and where it'd be most appropriate in the three subcommittees that we have.
I don't think it's appropriate for any of the three committees in and of themselves, because I think the scope of the bill is economic and tourism development for the Greater Mystic area. The subject was raised by the select person, excuse me, of Stonington. And I'm agnostic on the issue. And that becomes the question of how are we paying for, how are we paying to improve the tourism experience, and who bears the burden and who gets the revenue? Those issues become whether or not it goes up to Hartford and comes back in the form of grants if they're available, or whether there's a supplemental hotel tax levied for tourism, et cetera. Those are issues. I think the scope of the project at some point I want to say is more, what do we want to do? What is it going to cost us to do it? And then the follow-up question is going to be, how are we going to consider paying for it? Because at some point, that takes us past the structural recommendation from the Commerce Committee into bonding, revenue, and finance, and into the legislature, right? So,
Well, in that case, in the context of infrastructure, just putting out one idea.
yeah,
This really stems from, a proposal that was floated last year in the legislature, pushed by the administration and OPM, SB 11. There was a really interesting proposal within that comprehensive bill that would create district master plans and maybe these interlocal agreements. And so it would actually give the tools like Broughton and Stonington the kind of the taxing authority, actually give them the ability to form a joint taxing authority to pay for resilience related infrastructure over a long-term period. And that bill didn't make it out of the legislature or get called for a vote. But it's certainly some, but ultimately I think it's something that could be looked at as a solution in the context of paying for, resilience infrastructure upgrades within the Greater Mystic area.
yeah, I think you're spot on there, Representative Bumgarner. I appreciate the commentary. I think, look, when you look at the scope of things, you've got taxing authority, you have structural issues to attract federal dollars, you have grants, you have a host of ways you have to figure out. So which is why I've thought of, the plans are all actionable plans in the 6 to 18 months, 18 to 36 to 5 years, a development of a comprehensive plan to attract private and public partnerships and investments. And the question is managing the revenue stream and how we would do that. So I think it's valid. I think we will come about with a agreed on priority list on what we want to build or develop or solve to enhance the tourism issue. We'll come out with a plan of what we think the priorities are in infrastructure, coastal resiliency, sewers, all of that. And then the question of where and how and what the payment structure looks like and how does it get funded and how does it get paid will be probably a bigger conversation that will take us through part of the session or maybe all of the session, because I don't know where we're going to sit on a budgetary basis in the short term at the state level in terms of that. And I don't know where, the disposition is of the assembly. But we should, I think, creating a format and a structure and a plan that has generic support from the legislators in the district and the Commerce Committee becomes an arguing point to lobby on behalf of the legislature to those proposed solutions. But I'd say they're all of the above, and the question is which one gets called.
Investor?
Yep.
Just a quick question. I missed earlier discussion on the dredging. Is that basically capacity building? You go down instead of building walls up. Is that kind of what the dredging would be for?
I saw calls for the dredging of the Mystic Seaport as one of the requests, so I just want to know whether that is, if that becomes fundamental to the water taxi or to commercial development, or if it's just an add-on request. And I'm just looking at a ballpark, like whatever we're thinking of doing in that Mystic area, what are the reasonable price tags? And that may put it way down on the list, or based on what commercial activity we envision could happen, might put it higher up on the list. I really don't know. I'm not, I haven't looked at the economic need in development or whether it's requirement of the taxis. I just saw that potential dredging of Mystic River was brought up as one of the conversation points in the bill.
Rep. Meskers, Chris Regan has his hand raised.
Mr. Regan.
Thank you, sir. In regards to the infrastructure, on the Stonington side, we have a moratorium on the sewer hookups. So there's no new development that's going to end up happening until that gets resolved. They have aging equipment. So that's something that we need to take a look at, which is a big concern as a property owner on the Stonington side. In regards to drainage, Mystic Aquarium has an issue in the parking lot where 2010, there was a flood that happened at that time, and we had 100 cars floating in their parking lot. And that still is an issue when we get torrential rains. So that hopefully will get resolved in the infrastructure area. And then for dredging the river, I think it's more to get the bigger boats down to the seaport. More so than the water taxi, I believe.
Okay. That's very helpful on all fronts. So I guess additional hookups and further development are stymied by the sewer capacity at the point in time. That notwithstanding that, we can still, I guess at some point, encourage both the tourism with parking, et cetera. It's just we will be stymied another further development and hookups until that issue is resolved. That I wasn't aware of that, but that's another topic that needs to be added to the list. Patricia, in terms of sewer hookups in Stonington, appreciate it. Does anyone else have anything to add at this point? Go ahead, Lindsay.
Yeah, just to add on to that, I know that there have been funds that were put together for a parking lot in downtown Mystic on the Stonington side, but there's been issues with trying to mitigate the flooding there in terms of a valve that was tried to put in, and then some of the drainage needed to be fixed. I'm not sure exactly of the status of that. It's not the only place where that's going to be an issue, where there's opportunities for additional parking on the Stonington side, but we're dealing with flooding issues potentially becoming, increasing more frequent in the future.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Again, something we'll need to review in when we come through with potential plans. I'm going to be relying on, we've got Kate, we've got John and Danielle. I'm expecting to have them weigh in on where they think the disposition of the group is and what the problems are and what the potential solutions are, and all of us then coming forward with our ideas on how do we get to a consensus. So I appreciate that, Lindsay. I feel like this is my shortest group, but it may have the most difficult problems. Andre.
Yes, our first selectman isn't here, but also want to mention that the town in the last 2 years received $500,000 steep grant to construct their boathouse, which is adjacent to the Mystic Seaport, and they're actually have almost the amount of money they need. They are falling just a little bit short, and some of the areas they are falling short in would allow them to invest in a living shoreline project. And again, that's something that our state and certainly CTD has taken a look at in terms of prioritizing for restoring our coastlines. And I know for a fact that is a significant reason why people come to Mystic is our incredible vistas and that you can get along the Mystic River, especially in the Mystic Seaport area. Also, in the last couple of years, an organization called the Alliance for the Mystic River Watershed has formed, and they received the Long Island Sounds Futures Fund grant to create a watershed action plan. And so I know also been working closely with Heath as well on that.
I think I'd suggest you put through those comments and requests in writing, send it to us. We have to figure out what we tackle in terms of priorities for the entire group and what become particular representatives targeted issues in terms of development issues. I know the Seaport also has interest. The aquarium has concerns about chillers, and they're looking forward to some refrigerator issues. I know that there's a boathouse and display facility at the aquarium. Those may fit within our scope of what we're looking at in the medium to long term, but obviously the issue is enhancing the entire tourism aspect and what we can do to move that forward. So I want to make sure we bring all of that to the table so that when we come to the time of public hearings during the General Assembly, we figure out which portions get our priority for this opening session. So I appreciate that, Andre. That's very helpful.
That's correct, Rep. Meskers, and just an important note, not to confuse the Stonington town-owned boathouse with the boat hall project.
Oh, so I've managed to confuse myself. I apologize. That's good.
Yes, and that would be a rowing facility for the community that the entire community takes advantage of. And just one other thing, I haven't heard any comment or mention of our brothers and sisters in the part of our neighboring tribal nations, particularly the Mashantucket and Mohegan tribes who are part of this working group, and then also the Eastern Pequots that are part of our watershed as well. Even though this watershed, or the Mystic River watershed, does encompass both communities, it also does incorporate 2 tribal nations who are at the headwaters. And actually this weekend, there was a really great event over in Long Pond to celebrate this great collaboration that's happening. And so it is, again, this river is bringing people to the water and connecting people to this asset, and doing so, bringing more and more people to our community to enjoy that natural asset. So I think that's something we should also highlight.
Perfect. I appreciate that. Now, they are members of the committee. I guess, I think I'll fall on the knife that I think we did mention the committee meetings with 2 weeks notice at the prior meeting, but I'm going to make sure going forward, the next meeting will be noticed, or at least will be agenda to put, the calendar issue will be put out a week before the meeting, and the agenda will be floated the day before at the very least. But I'll make sure that everyone's aware. But, so far they've all been willingly joined the committees, and the participation wasn't full on this one, but it's understandable as we're just, getting started and moving out of both the summer season and getting through the organizational. So, any other comments or questions here? So I appreciate. From I think it's Emily, right? So Emily, any thoughts? Any things you can help with on that, on the Mystic? And Matthew, I appreciate your participation. Any thoughts or comments about how we potentially should think about organizing ourselves in relation to that? And the conversation with Mark about subsequent groups to organize to be able to attract federal dollars or potential structural issues that are going to achieve federal funding for some of the endeavors we may want to engage in and appreciate, right? And any research you and Mark can push forward on taxing authorities, et cetera, and how we would look to do that in the scope of what this bill is purported to do. Okay. I think that takes us to any further business, Patricia?
Nope, just want to mention 2 weeks from now is October 9th, and the organization will stay the same, 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, and 12 o'clock.
I believe I might, not to inject politics, I might have a debate on the 9th. But okay. I might not be, so if that may take, we'll get back to you to confirm the 9th. But my expectation, if I'm not here, then I will let it be chaired by my co-chair, Senator Hartley, in the worst case. But we'll move it forward then, okay?
Okay.
Thank you, Patricia. That concludes our meeting.